Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Dandadan Season 1, Episode 4. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. We pick up with Momo and Ken in front of the tunnel, and I love the whole back and forth of, no, you go first. No, I think the ladies should go first. It's like, fine, we'll go at the same time. And it's like, whoa, you're kind of letting me get ahead of you. It's like, no, we walk evenly. And it's like, okay, so what do we do when we catch up to Turbo Granny? Do we punch her in the face or what? But then they see a giant face filling the tunnel. It's like, cool, well, let's run away. The other end of the tunnel, it's like, yeah, this is her domain, so she's able to twist reality in here to fit her. So it's like, cool, we're trapped on both sides. It's like, well, then I guess we'll just have to, like, activate the curse. Oh, wait, she gave Ken his weenie back so he doesn't have his curse powers anymore. I was like, interesting. And she's like, oh, I'm not going to let you just borrow my powers. What, are you stupid? And I was like, that's actually pretty ingenious. That's the only thing keeping him cursed and allow him to use your powers. But in that moment, I thought was so badass that it's like she's about to gobble them both. And then Momo remembers what her grandmother said and is like, hey, like, are you really, like, you're supposed to be fast, right? Are you really just going to, like, I mean, that's so unfashionable, like, to try and eat us. But, I mean, you're so fast. I mean, shouldn't you be able to beat us in a race? I mean, do you really believe in your speed if that's the case? And I just love her turning just into her, like, Turbo Granny form, being like, oh, you have no respect. Here you are running your mouth. Fine. Like, what are the rules? It's like, no, we're not. It's not a race to a location. It's just tag. You catch us, you win. We outrace you, we win. And it's like, yeah, it's like a 10 minutes. You count 10 minutes and we run. But the problem is, Turbo Granny's like, oh yeah, I don't like cheaters. And then I was like, okay, she's counting real slowly. And then you saw her catching up time-wise. You're like, oh, what a dick. She's like, 1 minute, blah, blah, blah. I was like, well, she controls this reality. So I was like, could it be that technically time works differently in this tunnel? It's like, no, she's just a cheater herself, saying like, oh, no, you never told me how I had to specifically count. Because at one point, she did go like 8 minutes, 6 minutes. It's like she was screwing with them. And I was like, oh, you're such a cheater. So she captures Momo. I thought that was badass. Like all those hands coming up and like forming like this shell around her. And it's like, oh, I'm going to give you 10 minutes as well, Ken. And Ken's like, all right, you want me to suckle on your teeth? I'll do just that. So he bites her and she's like, hey, that's... how dare you do that without my permission? It's like, hey, you did offer before. Almost feel somewhat fair considering, like, well, you took his weenie, you might have given it back, but it's like time for some just dessert to be biting on your teeth and not letting go. But because of that, like the clothes he's wearing makes it hard for her to pull them off. So she ends up possessing him, and that gives Momo her opportunity to now grab him. And now she's smothering Turbo Granny. And it's like, oh, that worked. Now all we got to do is leave. And then the crab shows up, which I think is interesting. This ties into the revelation about the crab later on. But I thought was interesting because my immediate thought was when you hear the crab being like, yo, give Granny back. I was like, it almost sounds like a kid asking for their mom or their grandparent. And like I said, I will talk about that more later on, but I was like, I didn't think about that until I sat down, because I thought about it at the time, like, oh, that's interesting. And then you tie into the revelation about the location-based spirit. You're like, oh man, that actually kind of makes a lot of sense through line-wise, but we'll get to that when we get to it later. But because Momo, they like has smothered Granny so much to the point that like now Okarun is now cursed again. He can't activate his power, so it's speeding out. No, because they're initially just running regularly, and I love the animation for that, where it's like the crab is in the walls of the mountainside, and then it pops out and it's a crab. Apparently, people turn into a crab when they die, just so it's easier to cross the river Styx. But then, like, activates, curse mode. Okarun's running, but it's like, you're too heavy, so I can't make these turns. So, falling in the air. And I love for a brief moment, it's like, all right, let's go, like, full throttle, and is spinning his legs like a helicopter. I was like, oh, that's actually pretty sick. But it doesn't work, so they land, and it ends up being this like dash throughout town. I am so curious from that. Well, even Momo says it, like, what is everyone else seeing? Because she's like, there is no crab to the public's opinion. Because, like, later on, people are like, oh my god, it's an explosion. No one's seeing the crab, understandably, because they're tied to all this, so they are seeing it. I guess, like, I'm so curious how that works in general. This gave us a peek into that, and I guess we'll see it more later on. Of it makes sense, like, considering their run-ins with aliens and spirits, and her being, I guess, because I'm sure, like, spirits can manifest themselves to certain people, because beforehand, before she even got Okurun's, even before she got Ken's weenie, he was able to see her, so they can manifest themselves. But I guess, like, maybe Turbo Granny is a little different from the crab spirits, because, like, the location-based spirit is just, like, it's just a whole bunch of regular souls, whereas Turbo Granny is a special circumstance. Once again, I don't know. We do know that, like, this one girl was like, oh my god, look at them, and took a photo of them. And I love Momo being like, her only concern is, I hope we don't run into people I know, my friends, because that'd be so embarrassing. But that race all throughout town is like, and especially because of that scene in particular I'm talking about, where it was like a POV of, like, Momo on top of Okurun and he's running. I'm like, dude, that's just so beautifully done. I was like, I love the animation of it all. I was just like, oh, that's so sick and so cool. Like, this, like, race through the city like that. They ended up going to, like, a cafe. I can't remember if she did it at this point in time or is it later. I think it's later, but I love the whole her. And once again, I don't remember if I talked about it last episode, the representation of what her power looks like, those two, like, giant green hands. I was like, I love how that looks, and especially how she's able to utilize it this episode, especially because it's like, right, Ken has a hard time turning, moving at these speeds, especially with Momo in his back, but the fact of the matter is she's, like, using it to, like, grab onto stuff to, like, turn. I was like, that's so cool. But either way, like, first they go to, like, it's either, like, a hotel, because it's, like, a manga cafe, but, like, there's, like, a kind of a sauna. So it's like, right, she ends up breaking like a water pipe and boiling the crab, and it's like, cool, we were able to slow it down because it's which I thought that was an interesting explanation of, like, and I never thought about the intricacies of, well, I'm not a seafood person, so I never think about, like, how that works, but yeah, it's like the muscles tighten because of the heat, and that's what stops it. And all Momo, I just talked about this with Mecha Ood, about, like, how Aki's that protagonist of all she cares about is food, and I was like, I don't see too many, I'm not aware of too many female protagonists that have that, like, oh, I'm kind of a bit of an idiot and I like a lot of food. That's usually, like, certain male protagonist examples I use, like Luffy, Naruto, Goku. But either way, she was all about the crab, and it's like, really, under these circumstances, that's where your mind immediately goes to. But yeah, they're trying to still race out of town, but Turbo Granny has, she contacted some spirits. And I loved how that was represented, where it's like, yeah, there's a cemetery nearby, and all, like, the people who were kind of drawn in shadow, like, start ripping the shadow off of themselves and becomes, like, these kind of zombies. Because at first I was like, are you possessing people? It's like, I don't think you are. I think that's just what you naturally look like. I think that's what that's implying. But, Okurun can only go, full throttle one more time. So, she's like, trust me to do this. And he's like, all right. And transforms. And then, like I said, this is where she starts, like, slingshotting them around. I was like, it's so beautifully done. It's just so cool. Especially that last one where it's like a massive leap. And it's just like, he's, like, turning back to normal and they're falling in the air. So she's using her hands. They kind of remind me, speaking of curse, it kind of reminds me of the Sasuke's winged situation where his wings were giant hands in Naruto. Kind of reminded me of that, but she's using that to kind of slow them down. And then Ken transforms, like, pushes himself one more time to, like, slow their speed down. So it's like, cool, we're almost out of town, like, let's go. But the problem is, she let go of Turbo Granny, because up until this point, she had been physically grabbing Turbo Granny, but now she ended up letting go, and Turbo Granny's free. And it's like, oh yeah, you up here running your mouth like a little punk, you have no respect for your elders and stuff like that. So she's got her army, she's got her crab, and she fuses with the crab, and it's like, we got this. But it's like, fine, how you want to race again, another tag, like, want me to give you 10 minutes, 20 minutes. It's like, nah, only need 1 second. And she grabs Ken and grabs the train as it goes by. It's like, ha, the train's on, its max speed is 120 basic kilometers, your kilo Granny. And I was like, even, and she brings up the point of, yeah, but trains don't always go top speed. I was like, you're kind of screwed if you end up at a stop, but it's also, yeah, they slow down to take curves. So, but they only needed to like keep going because Granny was falling right into their trap because Dodoria had set up her, Momo's grandmother had set up a trap. So all you have to do is hold her in place, and then they go past like the barrier, and the spirit and Granny are taken out. And then we see like a whole bunch of people leave the crab. And so it's like, right, they came out victorious in the end. But they go back and revisit the place to kind of pay their respects. And Momo's grandmother explained, this place is where a lot of girls Momo's age were violated, cut to pieces, and tossed away. And I was like, that is dark. And that's what the crab spirit was. It was a culmination of all those spirits of young girls that were violent. You're like, that is dark and depressing. But this goes back to what I was bringing up earlier about like, oh, like a child asking for their grandmother or something. Apparently, like, a whole bunch of spirit mediums have been trying to hunt Turbo Granny before now. But the thing is, Turbo Granny chooses to go to locations where stuff like that happens because she tries to like console them. I don't know if Turbo Granny had grandchildren or children of her own in her previous life before she became the yokai that she is, but at the very least she tries to console the spirit. So there's actually a really sweet element to it. It's kind of this interesting balance, and that's kind of a lesson her grandmother, that's what Momo's grandmother wanted to teach them, that it's understandable why Turbo Granny like wants to be protective of the kids. It's not okay to attack the living, but it's also not okay to like mock the spirit. So it's like this balancing act that the living and the dead have to respect. It's for things to be in its equilibrium. Like, you don't attack the living, but we also don't mock the dead. We pay our respects. And you see Momo kind of tearing up because it's like, right, they only knew the dickish side of Turbo Granny. Now they realize like, oh, there was actually something more to this. And I'm sure there's the element of Okarun kind of going in their dress, oh, like it's something scary and stuff. And it's like because Momo dared him. So I think there's an element of, all right, once again, she feels guilty because she's like, Ken would have never been in this situation if I hadn't, like, convinced him to do that. But I think that, so she probably feels a little at fault of like, oh, like, Granny probably has felt like, oh, you were mocking me coming in here just to be scared and stuff like that. It's like, because of that, I think she felt a little regret about it. So, but yeah, especially now knowing like, oh my God, like what the truth behind the spirits in this tunnel were. So. But at the very least, what they did, as we see, it released all those spirits. So they are able. Sometimes Momo's grandmother was kind of like, right, sometimes you have to use force to basically force the spirits to move on. So I guess that's the end of Turbo Granny and that location-based spirit. So sadly, I mean, there might be other spirits that not find their way, because other girls might still find themselves, I don't know, that location hopefully never gets used like that again, but that might be, there might be other areas that have a similar history to that tunnel. So, but overall, it's all resolved, and our boy does have his weenie back, and I love that Momo's grandmother's like, show me. But it's like, yeah, he doesn't have much of an appetite, and Momo's like, yeah, I think my grandma was just trying to, you weren't eating, and she could tell you were depressed, so she tried to like bother you so you'd be a little more active. But like Momo she was too focused on eating, so it's like, can you really say that for sure? But it's like, nah, I think, her grandmother can seem like such a goofball and a weirdo, but I do believe she does have a good heart, obviously. It is kind of interesting that you guys are, I can't tell if they just ordered crab after the fact, because I was about to say, yeah, because the crab spirit's gone, so I guess it's like, I mean, I think that's also the thing, how can you eat crab after what we went through? But it's like, I guess it's their way of kind of processing and dealing with everything as well. But yeah, we have Ken going home, which someone had recently brought up, like, oh yeah, what about Ken's family? It's like, well, we don't know what his home situation is like. Maybe we'll find out as this season progresses. But it was kind of this like little sweet thing at the end where they're like, well, goodbye, goodbye, and then they're both rattling it off their heads like, goodbye, 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 because it felt so final, like, oh, is this the end? But then she's like, hey, Akuru, see you tomorrow, because it's like, right, we are friends, and it's not, she had made that proclamation like episode 2 and 3 of like, because he was like, oh, are you just going to go back to being stranger? And she was like, no, like, don't just assume you know what people are feeling. So it's kind of nice to end the episode off on kind of that high note and victory. So I'm excited to see where the series goes from here. Like I said, I think the general plot going forward is, hey, they fight spirits and aliens going forward. And obviously we still have 2 other main characters to get introduced to. The other boy and girl we see in the intro. So who they are and how they come into the story is going to be interesting. But also, what does this mean going forward for Okura? Oh, Ken. I keep calling him by his fake name, but Ken, because it's like, how does that turbo granny situation work? Because I doubt your powers are gone. So I wonder if there's some imprint of turbo granny, like maybe it's like he, in the process of all of that, a small piece of granny still exists with him. Or maybe it's like it's left a permanent mark on him so he can always use his power going forward. I don't know like how they're going to like explain that going forward. But it's like there's no way you're going to get rid of like that being his power. I was listening to someone recently. I can't remember where I heard it. But apparently this is like roughly the first 20 chapters of the manga apparently revolve around the Turbo Granny retrieval of Weenie arc. So I guess we're moving into the next arc now, and I'm curious to see what that ends up being like. I'm so curious to see what the story is like going forward, because I figured like because that's what surprised me when I was like, whoa, like we're going to fight Turbo Granny now. I was like, are they gonna lose and then have to like come back later? It's like, no. Episode 4, we've already beat Turbo Granny. Like I said, Weenie has been retrieved, so I'm so excited to see where this series goes going forward, because it's going to continue to be just as random and weird, and I'm excited to see what happens. I'm also excited to see, as we can kind of see, it's going to be Ken and Momo back at school, so with their new dynamic, it's going to be them in school post everything happening to them, because technically this has all been like, what, 2 days? Everything's happened over the course of 2 days, because they both went to the tunnels and that hospital at night. Then it was like daytime in episode 2, and it was nighttime, and well, it was dusk / nighttime for 3, and they spent all night here. So it's only been like 2 days in general. Like these 4 episodes have happened over the course of 2 days, which once again, I like the thought of like, I like time frames, knowing like how long a story's taking place. Like, oh, this entire story took place over the course of a day or a month. Like there's a webtoon I always can never remember its title. Is it Blazing Stormbringer Transfer Student or something like that? It's been a while, but I love that both seasons of that webtoon both are taking place on 2 separate days. It's just 1 full day, both seasons. It's stuff like that I always think is so neat. Like I said, I'm a nut for like time frames and stuff like that. So it's not like they've been away forever. It's kind of like the whole point, the whole point of my diatribe. So it's going to be interesting to see their new dynamics, considering how much they've went through these past 2 days, and them butting heads in their relationship in school and stuff like that. So it's going to be really interesting to see. Especially because Ken has that very pessimistic personality, which still came out when he was transforming, obviously. But it's like he has that pessimistic point of view where he's just kind of like, he kind of snaps at Momo just because I think it's them butting heads. But I think he also likes that aspect of their relationship, because I think he's scared that like, if we don't have that, maybe how will I make sure you stick around? So like a lot of that, like, Ken's got his own issues to figure out, and I'm curious to see how that plays out with their dynamic going forward. Sorry, I just kept rambling off, so I do apologize. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens next. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.